Good evening. I'm Jean Znidarsic, founder of Tarweed for Writers, and your host for this evening. I'm delighted to welcome you to the first ever Tarweed Works in Progress reading. It has been a group effort, and we are very grateful to have this opportunity at Mid-Peninsula Media. Tarweed's mission is to introduce writers and their work to readers in search of fresh voices. And we have a stellar group of writers tonight, including me. Writing is an act of freedom. We get to write and to read our work as we do here tonight because we are still free. We dedicate this reading to the refugees imprisoned for seeking a better life, to victims of human trafficking, and all those who are wrongly imprisoned and silenced. Our first reader came a long way to be here with us. I first heard her read at the amazing Why There Are Words reading in Sausalito. She will read from her story, The Clock. Please welcome Susanna Solomon.
The Clock. The third day I was in Paris, I hopped the metro back to Musée d'Orsay. The building was huge. Once a train station, now it was a museum. Glass ceilings soared above me. Balconies and stairways led every which way. A gigantic clock, which I'd missed last time, hung just outside the window at the front of the museum, just outside the third floor. You could see all of Paris through the back of the clock. Haussmann buildings across the river rose behind the Roman numeral 6. A few tourists looked out the window in front of me. The numbers were backwards, of course, because the clock was supposed to be read by people outside coming to the train station, not by people inside the building looking out. It was raining. People were milling about, waiting for the rain to stop, and then they were gone. I took my place behind the 6 and looked out at the misty Seine below, at the mansard roofs across the river. I imagined walking through the clock and traveling back in time. What would it have been like? To be there during the Revolution when the streets were full of blood, to hear the German jackboots pound the streets as they marched to the Arc de Triomphe, to wave American flags from open windows on the day the Americans arrived in their tanks, trucks, and jeeps. I had been a little girl then when Mama pressed a small American flag in my hand. Everyone was lining the streets and cheering as the tanks rolled by. We'd been down so long, I held Mama's hand tight and looked up. Tears ran down her face. She had tried to protect me, but I'd seen the grim lines of hungry people, the soldiers returning from the war, leaning on their wooden crutches, desperation and despair filling their eyes. And I remembered our butcher Abe and his family disappearing. Mama had prayed every night, and I with her, my knees on a threadbare carpet in front of the windows, listening to the voice of America. And back further, I could see through the rising mist, through a dark cloud which dissipated. When the plague came, we were poor and didn't have the option to move out of the city like so many of our neighbors. Our house was stone, at least, but others who lived in wooden structures, their homes had been burned down to rid the streets of rats. 2 of my friends in our building had died, and Aunt Renee's baby Ruth was in the worst way and was not expected to live. Why I was spared, I never know, but as I grew up, we left our memories behind. No one wanted to think about the time when Paris lost 30% of its population. It took years until I stopped having nightmares about seeing wagons full of bodies roll through the streets. The clock in front of me clicked as the hour hand slid to 5 p.m., while the minute hand, at least 10 feet long, eased along behind. I looked through the glass again. I could see myself as a young girl running in the park across the river. "Come on, Amy, follow me." My cousin Jean-Marie from Lycée Fenelon waved me on. We were walking hand in hand in the Tuileries, our mothers 50 feet behind us. Jean-Marie held a ball, a red one, and gestured for me to go back, to run back so she could throw it at me. And I ran as fast as I could and turned, but she was gone. Jean-Marie, I called. I saw no one. I ran back to where we'd separated. Jean-Marie, I yelled, but no 10-year-old girl with braids was in sight, just an older couple walking arm in arm under some mulberry trees. Fighting rising panic, I ran around in all directions, hollering her name. There had been news in the papers about bad guys kidnapping girls and chaining them up in crates. Had they already grabbed Jean-Marie? I ran back to the picnic bench where we'd started, eager to find the moms. The ground beneath my shoes sounded like sandpaper as I ran. I didn't remember running so far away from my mom and her sister. Had they been standing under this tree or that one, in the open or in the shade? I moved fast, covering ground, yelling, Jean-Marie, Jean-Marie, until my throat got sore and I just yelled, Mama, Mama, and that's when I saw them, our mothers, sitting on a bench. My mom and her sister Françoise was pushing a stroller back and forth with her feet. I ran closer, panicked. They would blame me, they'd call the police, and horrible things would happen to Jean-Marie. Amy! My mother stood up straight, dropping her knitting on the ground. Come, Amy, come, she's here. I ran into my mom, driving my head and shoulders to her belly, and she held me close, close, as my cries turned into big, hacking sobs. She's here, dear, right here. Don't worry so, my darling, Mama said, and Jean-Marie came over and held me too. You had such a scare, my sweet. I couldn't stop shivering. Everything's okay, sweetheart, my mother said, and held me for the longest time. My heart was pounding, my hands were clammy and cold, but Jean-Marie was fine. She held the red ball and looked at me with kind eyes. People on benches nearby shook their heads, while a group of Parisian teenagers, all girls, gossiped and laughed as they walked in the open, and I held Mama closer until I felt better a little bit. It took all day, 2 cups of chamomile tea and cinnamon toast, 2 slices, before I felt like myself again. I backed out of the clock. I'd been in Paris with my own mother years ago, and she had been wearing her shirt dress as usual. We'd walked the quay, checked out the books at the booksellers along the way, held hands as we crossed streets, and I, so much smaller, had to run to catch up until she was gone, really gone, and I had been 14. The big clock struck 6. A guard came up behind me and said, Maman, nous fermons maintenant, we are closing. Merci, madame. And I followed a few people down the escalator, out the lobby, and into a drizzly rain. I walked around and looked at the giant clock. It was so high up there, I could barely see what time it was, but knew it was time to go. Tomorrow, perhaps, I'd come back, step through the clock, and once again be in my mother's arms. Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
I was so jealous when I heard that she got to go to Paris to do research for her work. I just wanted to ask you a question or two, if that's okay. What inspires you to write about a subject beyond just getting to go to Paris and hang out there?
Oh, well, what possessed me to write is I've been possessed by writing since I was actually 14. And I write about anything. I write about something I see in the police log. I write about some shoes in a picture window. And the other story I was going to read tonight was about a blue dachshund that I dreamt about.
Awesome. How do you keep at it until it's finished? Like, what makes you stick with a story until it's all the way done?
Torture and pain. I go to a cafe and I write down the time, and as long as I work for 1 hour, then I can go.
Awesome.
So try to work an hour every day.
Wonderful.
But I cheat a lot.
Well, do you have challenges as you write besides just the torture?
Well, I always think I'm no good.
Really?
Yeah.
So you struggle like we all do with...
Well, maybe I was okay yesterday, but today not so much. That's what I think about.
Well, you did a wonderful job here, and your Point Reyes stories are very funny.
Well, thank you very much.
What's the name of that?
Point Reyes Sheriff's Calls
Yeah.
and more Point Reyes Sheriff's Calls. Two
And
books.
those were based on,
Sheriff's Calls in the Point Reyes Lita Westmere newspaper. And then I wrote a novel about a pole dancer, a farmer, and a river.
oh, I want the one about the pole dancer.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jean.
Thanks. Our next reader is a Palo Alto local whose keen insights into people inform her work. Please welcome the mysterious and glamorous Jeri Kean.
Thank you. The Shady Acres community pool was described as sparkling by realtors, but is full of hairballs by anyone else who swam laps in it, especially the teenagers on the abalone swim team. This morning, it was indeed sparkling and surrounded by fresh grass, majestic palms, and rows of white recliners with folded teal umbrellas. Just the tableau to inspire any real estate agent, except for Astrid Carmichael, who eyed it from her window across the park, while she rewrote the flyer on number 68 for yet another open house. She could not see how the ripples bumped a soggy toy against the blue tiles of the deep end, or how, as the surface settled, so did the long Clairol cinnamon toast hair furling around the gently bobbing head of a body that floated in the center. Face down, arms outstretched, she wore just one running shoe and one sleeve of her polyester USA swimming hoodie, while the other dangled in the murk. At 9:14 a.m., Bonnie Parker pulled into the parking lot, swearing at the teens who had apparently snuck up on the roof again to fling that lump of lost and found towels back into the water. Priority one was to get rid of them before Daly arrived to check up on her, as he did nearly every morning under some thin pretense, such as needing to change a light bulb or pick up an expense form. If Daly saw the towels in the pool, he'd accuse her of shirking her responsibilities as pool manager. She let the gate clang shut behind her and set her handbag by the office door, grabbed the pole hook, and dropped it on her foot. Curses. A crowd gathered in the grassy knoll outside the fence as the emergency team packed up their equipment and the police took over. Who could have done this? Was a constant remark, followed by furtive glances, exaggerated shrugs, and platitudes about motherhood, community spirit, and the killer margaritas she used to make. Astrid Carmichael backspaced over the text describing number 68. How to mention the pool, but not call attention to it now that it was going to be in the news. Recreational facility? Clubhouse? She sat back, took a long draught of coffee, and wondered for the umpteenth time if the events of last night would mean she could finally sell that wretched house. Aquatic Annex. While typing, she told her phone to call Barbara B. Hey, Barbara. Astrid, how are you, dear? Listen, would you mind if we postpone our visit to that darling Zimbardo in Shady Acres? We have painters in there today. How's tomorrow? Someone started an engine and the crowd got louder. Pardon me? These neighborhood songbirds, I can't hear a thing. Popping the phone on her shoulder, she slid the window shut. Great. On the early side? I'll be taking offers on a listing all morning. Say 5? She looked in the mirror, absently fingering her spindly hair. Fabulous. No, that's AM. I want you to experience the serene park atmosphere, she said, lifting a blouse from a hamper of clothes. Daly should be passed out by then. She shook out some slacks. I'm loving my view as we speak. You'll never live to regret an investment in Shady Acres. See you then. Bye-bye. She thumbed the phone off and upended the hamper. Where was that wig? In spite of being the tallest person in any crowd, Mildred Jarndyce stationed herself beside the chain-link fence to get the best view, wearing curry yellow slacks, a puce blouse, and a pensive smile. She watched the huddle of men in uniforms conversing near the changing rooms. They had fished out the body and lay it face up under a tarp, the water still seeping across the concrete and dripping into the pool. On the far side, she saw Astrid Carmichael tottering across the grass, a bright scarf over her head. Her heels kept catching in the sod, which reminded her of Dooley O'Flaherty in his Auntie Mame Halloween costume. Mildred sighed, remembering that Halloween night, how he clung to her arm, his beer breath warm in her ear, whispering that she was the only person tall enough for him to hang on to. Astrid had made it around the pool and elbowed through the crowd. "What happened?" she said, mistaking Mildred's smile for a welcome. Mildred looked down at her from under a white visor. "How could this happen at Shady Acres?" "Who is it?" Astrid said, bracing for the inevitable evasion. A vigorous ambulance chaser, Mildred always had an angle. "She was such an incredible mother," Mildred said, shaking her head. Astrid tried the direct approach. "I heard it was Kitty." "Poor Dooley," said Mildred, with a jolt of pleasure at saying his name. "This is going to cost somebody." "So it is Kitty, then?" Nonchalant behind her glasses, Astrid scanned the shrubbery in the area where she'd spent time the night before. They didn't even bother with CPR. Now that's dead. Certainly. She was such an asset. The woman was an asset to her community. Spotting a sodden puff draped in the branch of a mulberry bush outside the fence, Astrid sidled towards it. "I know just what you mean, dear." Mildred followed, scanning for Dooley among the men at the pool. "What will this do to our property values?" "Shady Acres is resilient," Astrid said with a wave at the surrounding Zimbardo-designed homes in their chalky palette of 5 board-approved colors, while a handsome Asian-looking gentleman climbed the fence, reached over with a gloved hand, and plucked the puff from the branch. Astrid gave a little hiccup. "Your dad must be squirming in his grave," observed Mildred. "Somebody will have to compensate all of us homeowners." "Well, at least he's safe from frivolous lawsuits," Astrid snapped, as the detective stuffed her favorite wig in a plastic evidence bag. "No doubt," said Mildred, with regret. "I better go home and check on Brad. Then I'm off to Serenedale to play 9 holes with a client." "I wouldn't have thought a client of yours could manage to swing a club." "Well, the neck brace does cramp his drives." "Who'd you pin that on? The maid?" "Well, you can't be too careful with floor wax. She was lucky her mother owned that house in Jalisco. Talk about property values." "I won't keep you when Serenedale is having such beautiful weather. Now there's a prime location. I'd love to get you and Brad in one of those estates." Mildred, snooping for a lawsuit, cramped her style. Astrid slipped her iPhone out of a pocket and whispered, "Bottom feeder." Texting, oops. She wondered why Mildred went toward the cul-de-sac when the Jarndyces lived on the opposite side of the park. But clients awaited. She thumbed on multiple offers, stuck in Serenedale for now. Sad face. Let's reschedule. Shady Acres swarming with buyers. Gotta show you this gem before someone grabs it. She hit send and started another. Good news and bad. Take 10 more G's off 68 Shady A. Big obstacle removed. Explain later. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeri read from her novel, Revenge of the Abalone. So what inspired you to write about your subject?
Well, I look around and I see a lot of people try to live vicariously through their kids, maybe use them to fight their battles or solve their frustrations that they had growing up.
So that's your main topic, or do you also like juicy murder mysteries?
Oh, I love murder mysteries. I mean, it's really fun to kill who you choose.
I happen to know that you like to watch gruesome movies.
I like gore, yes.
Yes. So
I do.
I hope that we'll find some of that further in this novel.
Oh, don't worry. We will have plenty of gore.
And how do you keep at a project until you've finished it? Do you have some techniques, or do you force yourself to write every day, or?
I usually set myself a page count. I say, okay, 3 pages, that's it. A lot of coffee, drink a lot of coffee, pick a nice place to work, a nice cafe, and take breaks and just crank it out.
Yeah? Do you have another story in the works at this point, or are you still working on this one?
I'm still working on this one. Yeah, I've got a few things kind of rolling around in my head, but yeah, I'm still.
Some tweaks,
Yes,
perhaps?
definitely.
Where did you learn how to write? Like, how did you?
Mostly practice. I had a really good friend of mine who sat with me a lot of the time and kind of tutored me through the process as she was working on her own work, and yeah, learned a lot from her.
Oh, a good friend. Huh?
Yes, yes.
Did she also have a sense of gore and murder, an enjoyment of murder mysteries?
Definitely, in a sense of adventure and wanting to try new things and willing to take risks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you took a risk coming and reading for us, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next writer grew up in Palo Alto and divides his time between his hometown, San Francisco, and his beloved Paris, France. A little-known fact, he will appear as a character in one of the novels we hear from tonight. He's reading from his novel, Intravenous. Please welcome the effervescent Michael Znidarsic.
Hi all, this is from a larger piece, as she said. It is news to me that I'll also be appearing as a character as well as an author today, so allow me to process that as I start off. It is not a power Stephen has ever wished for. She is breathing softly, edging towards low snores. This must be how a hero feels, or how they write one to feel, he thinks to himself. Not heroic at all, just dutiful. Sleep had made her face relax into a mild and contained disappointment, at peace with disappointment. The room around them is a collage of textile drapery, mostly female slouchwear, contoured by pulled-out dresser drawers and wild-axis swivel chairs. He has been trying to take off his hoodie and socks for a while, but the left side of her head is resting between his right bicep and shoulder, and he doesn't want to move. He never goes to bed with socks or sweatshirt on. It makes him feel uncomfortable for some reason. If he can hold out just a little while longer and make sure she hits REM, he thinks he could then extricate his limbs without completely waking her, and he imagines for a while the flattened lateral serpentine movements he would use to slip the noose, but doesn't. For exactly that little while, he has been stealing glances at the faux antique clock on her bedside table and filling the ticks in between each glance with philosophy. It was 1:37 a.m. when he had thought of that hero analogy. There is some obligation that comes with a power like his. An onus exists to make use of a power you are endowed with, an obligation to put it to good use. To say that the power is endowed implies that you have no say in the power's assignment. So to what extent does anyone endowed with a power get to really enjoy free will? Is a steering wheel inherently the slave of a map, and if so, what use is it to anyone, to him? How is it fair to have no control over your own standards and yet be doomed to fail if you don't meet them? This understanding of duty makes Stephen feel a little bit trapped. Not at all like a wounded creature with his as yet unchewed right arm stuck under some fallen boulder or trunk of a felled tree. Not like that. The trap is simple. If Stephen's actions are dictated by his ability, then his vastest horizons are sunk down to within an arm's reach of his own puny hominid frame. Stephen never feels lonelier than in these moments, when he remembers how little others care about those questions he finds so meaningful. A glance, 1:45 a.m., a little closer, making progress. The first glance taken on this particular evening had been at the digital clock above the incoming call display on his iPhone. The clock had said 11:04 p.m. then, and the incoming call was from her. He was alone in his room, and until the ring, asleep. He had begun keeping his phone on a loud ring setting at night, so it had woken him with a start. It was difficult to remember to switch to and from the silent setting for lectures and study sessions, but he was getting used to it. He had answered the phone, and she had told him she was having another attack. He could hear the panic in her voice, as if the words were being squeezed out. Was it the caffeine? He asked. No. Stress? Not really. Just tell me what you need. Talk to me, please. No ice cream or movie, or just talk. The first time that she had ever asked him to talk like this, the pauses had been long, and he had hurried and blundered out of them, which probably exacerbated the situation somewhat. She would prompt him if he went too slow, asking which species of kelp they had dissected that week in lab, or why recycling wasn't enough on its own to eliminate the harmful levels of waste with which humanity was plaguing its own biosphere. If they were together in the same place, he could actually tell she was having an attack simply from such an enthusiastic interrogation on the most esoteric of his interests, which were, of course, the proportionally more dear to him. This time, he shook the liquids in his skull to roust himself for the coming performance and started to take stock of his surroundings. As usual for such a night, he was sprawled out on his e-commerce bed frame. 4 walls and several more to the southerly direction stood between him and the Pacific Ocean, which continued to audibly gnash against the promontory that the house and its neighbors sat atop. A Cat 6 Ethernet cable was pinned to the wall and snaked around in the 180-degree turn to the sub-foyer that introduced the bedroom's door to the hallway in an arrangement symptomatic of a prior and shoddy remodeling. Okay, I can do that. Any topic of choice? No preference, just please. Here goes, he acceded. The second time she had ever called him like this, at a critical moment of word loss, he had tried eliminating his pauses by just picking some belief and rushing through, monologuing, strawmanning, voicing multiple characters in debate with one another, asking her a question occasionally and working her responses into his broader points. He had then drifted further and farther from the conversation's epicenter, meandering with greater and greater amplitude along the bounds of relevance to it, looking back at intervals to see her following him the whole way, her posture relaxing and her eyelids starting to lower. This was now the primary tactic he deployed. This particular night, as he knuckled the corners of his eyes and mouth and cradled his phone with his shoulder and neck, while he pulled on his jeans, grabbed his wallet, and hopped on his longboard, he aimed a conspiratorial and mounting tirade into the mouthpiece about the self-serving and commons-confounding use of unsafe mineral extraction processes, spanning from the collapse-prone Ag et Bourrage quarrying technique of the Middle Ages on through the mercury-laden San Francisco Bay food chain, a la placer mining, and forward to the present fracking operations offshore from their town, the forward-thinking and forlorn Intravenous, California, which dwarfed the tiny pebbles of tar the local Native Americans had gathered from the shoreline so long ago by expelling huge clods of the stuff, which glistened now like burnt firewood as it washed ashore in ever-increasing volume and brought about an inverse trend in the median adult size of the regional sea life. Light expulsions of air punctuated his speech, each driven out by a push of his right foot that propelled the longboard down his street, which spanned yard to yard as it paralleled the Pacific coast. Each vacant lot that passed to his right revealed a cosmos of moonlit ripples floating in the black ocean, and floating among them were the garishly lit oil rigs that freshmen used to call the Christmas trees, the oases of the spill-prone gas giants. These diatribes of his, you see, do lapse sometimes toward the freer of associations. But for their duration, she is all ears, careful to mark every individual word, even if it means skipping a holistic meaning, pausing from her listening only to encourage him, hanging so zealously on for his next diversion to break her next moment's fall. With each moment, she slips farther into her own peace. Stephen is rounding the corner of Posado and Corto. The clock is rounding 11:30. The panic is leaving as he is arriving. Kelp forests, beaver dams, punt gun, passenger pigeon, Rocky Mountain locust, plow under, aquifer, urban runoff, marsh filter, kelp forests, coral bleach, ocean currents, warm nights, dark streets, longboards, front doors, ice water, cool sheets, open windows, soft pillows, heroism, gentle sleep. Now awake, again alone, and smiling as he waits to free himself, it is not a power Stephen has ever wished for, but a vigil he is exultant to have earned. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write about Intravenous?
Well, loosely based on a much maligned and yet cherished town that several people I know were residents of, it is basically one of the main things you find when you go to a new job with departments or a school with a whole bunch of different academic majors and programs, is that you got a lot of people who care a lot about each other and yet not about each other's interests. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can't dodge that inherently. But it strikes me as interesting that people who care very much about each other are not necessarily able to carry on the more meaningful conversations and conversation topics that they'd like to have. And this, I guess this is probably more about being at peace with that and finding a middle ground and finding meaning in your own way of communication with the people that you care about.
How far have you come in your project of writing this whole, it's a novel or a collection of stories?
It's more of a novel, if I had to say. I mean, it's not there yet, but the idea is to, whenever I find something that I actually care about like this, the impetus, seizes me and I need to write it down, or else I feel really bad about myself for having forgotten, like whatever it was I was going to write, or having failed in the limited time that I have to actually record something that I find meaningful to myself. And it's really internal in that way. Even if nobody sees it, I would feel really bad forgetting, like if I forgot, when I started writing this, if I had forgotten like the idea that led to it, I would have felt really bad about myself and like really, oh man, I wish I could have had that to look back on. And so it's really an internal thing.
What's the most challenging thing for you in terms of keeping working? Is it because you're really busy with other things, or
Busyness
are you
and
able
just
to?
laziness is the only thing that really pushes me past the initial, the hubris to metaphorically pick up a pen or to open up the Word doc or Google Doc or whatever, is that kind of, I guess, panic of not actually writing it down and not having it to look back on, and therefore it's gone from you forever. You can't ask yourself if you forget. You can't pull it back out of yourself and say, well, what did you mean by this? And this tremendous feeling of loss is the only way I sort of surmount any, the inherent laziness I sort of feel towards something like this. So it moves forward and lurches.
Yeah. I have a question to ask you, but I probably shouldn't ask it right now.
Are you sure?
Yeah, but
We're being told to stretch.
well, I want to know. I want to know, like, what initially were you, like? Do you want to share this story with, like, do you want to have it published? Do you have a message that you're hoping?
Oh, from the holistic work?
Yeah.
No, I just felt that this particular part stands out from it because I thought it was pretty self-contained. It's not here because it's like the linchpin of the whole thing. It's just a part that I felt was worth sharing, and without any context, and so
Yeah. So what's next?
Do
Do you have other writing projects in the works, or do you have other things you want to get to when you finish this?
Sure, I'm trying to feed really everything that I have inspiration for into this one, so that I can actually have like a large work that's close to completion. But it's that feeling of never being able to finish something that really bites, and you try to combat that by throwing every piece of inspiration that you get throughout life into one work, and sometimes it's hard to throw things away because they don't fit.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Our next piece is part of a textured and deeply affecting memoir titled Leaving Mendocino. I've had the fun of watching as it develops. Please welcome Keiran Brandabur Langur.
Thank you. Good evening. This is an excerpt from one of the stories. It's called Big Beach to the Local. We stopped at an enormous driftwood log on Big Beach. Anais and Aries put down their huge blow-up rafts near me. Aries lied down on his and closed his eyes, while Anais pulled her beach cover up over her new navy blue tankini. She stared down at him, fierce and impatient. She wanted to have an adventure with him. He just wanted some peace. Looking at them, I felt a familiar ache, but I tuned it out. She kicked his raft. "Let's go!" "All in good time," he said in his old man voice. Man, he could really make me laugh. Dutifully, though, he got up. After several minutes of shoe removal, stretching, and deliberations, they trudged toward the water's edge, dragging their rafts behind them. They were talking about something, pointing at something, but I couldn't hear. I gave my immediate surroundings a good once-over. A dog was digging a hole in the sand. Someone walked by and said something about a shortcut to China, amid much laughter. Nearby, a family had come to the same log I was leaning against. They had brought a picnic basket full of food and were settling in on their blankets. One of them, a tall, heavily tattooed mom, took her kids, a boy and a girl, to the water's edge. She began yelling at the little boy, who was brandishing a stick at the even littler girl. The girl seemed oblivious to the danger, either because she was too young to understand, or more likely she was just used to it. The mom, though, was really mad. She seemed sick of having to protect her own daughter from her own son. I felt bad for the little boy, though. Some boys just can't resist doing stuff like waving a stick around like it's a sword. I guessed that she had liked him better and had probably treated him better before she'd had the girl. Once she had that baby girl, I imagined that her little boy looked less like her darling firstborn and more like just an irritating, reckless little kid with a sharp stick. The dad was also rather lavishly tattooed, sported a pretty impressive beard, and was also large. I'm not saying that either of them were fat. They weren't. They were just really tall and, well, big. I felt sort of puny by comparison. It was probably kind of reassuring to have a mom and a dad who looked like they could kick someone's... I don't think I should say that. I know I'd never mess with a kid whose parents looked like they'd easily win a bar brawl. I looked out at the ocean. Aries and Anais were still pretty close to the water's edge, floating now in their rafts. A young man, in jeans and a hoodie, walked by in front of me. His two dogs trotted next to him. One had a stick in its mouth. A local, I thought to myself. You learn to tell the locals from the tourists after a while. The dogs were not on leashes, which normally would have irritated me, but I learned a long time ago not to mess with locals. I picked up my Vanity Fair and tried to find something to read. Vanity Fair is a very social climbing sort of magazine. You've got to be Hollywood royalty like Natalie Wood style, or beyond glamorous like John F. Kennedy Jr., someone like that, to be of interest to Vanity Fair. Either that or you'd better own an island and have a title, or be a television star who married a prince. I looked up to see what the A's were doing. They were still floating in the water. A dog was swimming near them, a frisbee in its mouth. It was a peaceful, unwindy, sunny day. Two different, unrelated families had tiny newborn babies with them. Who would bring a newborn baby here, I wondered. One of the babies was crying, that horrid, jagged squall they make. It really might be the world's worst sound. It's specifically designed to make you do anything to stop it. If you're halfway sane, that means you learn how to soothe, how to rock, how to pace, to comfort the baby, and make it stop that way. If you let it drive you crazy, or if you are already crazy, you may shake the baby to stop the noise, or throw the baby out the window. At this point, I was unsure which category I was in. That baby needs to be indoors, I thought, in a cool, dark, quiet place, so it can recover from the rude trauma of crashing into this world. I looked back at the water. The bright orange rafts had drifted out a bit further away from me now. Behind me, the tattooed giants were unpacking the food they'd brought. That is, the mom was unpacking the food. The dad was drinking a beer, willfully oblivious to the drama of his giant mom growing hatred of her stick-wielding son. That little boy has no idea, I thought, how stupid he is. For gradually, day by day, stick by stick, sawing at the rope of his mother's affection, he can't possibly know how precious her love and protection are. Are those your kids? The voice of a man cuts into my reverie. What? I ask, shading my eyes to make out the figure of a young man standing in front of me. It's the local with the two dogs I'd seen walk by earlier. Now he is a dark silhouette against the bright sun. The silhouettes of his two dogs are nearby. Those kids on the orange rafts, are they your kids? He repeats. Yes, why? I say, looking out at the water. As I do, I realize with alarm that they are much farther off now. The two orange rafts have moved very quickly toward the open sea, the churning white foaming waves, and the cliffs. They're being taken out with the tide, he says. I'm silent, struck dumb from the effort of trying to take in what he is saying. They're in trouble, he says. He is calm, but he is almost shouting. I get up from the log and start running toward the water. As I run, others on the beach are becoming aware of the situation. One woman runs toward me with a phone in her outstretched hand, a look of anguish on her face. That gesture and her expression scare me. Gratefully, I take the phone, still running, and try to dial 911. I had left my phone in the car like a moron. We were all looking at the waves crashing into the side of the cliffs, trying to see where the rafts are now. Don't call 911 yet, admonishes a young woman near me. I know CPR, and I have a wetsuit in my trunk. What an unbelievable idiot, I think, fumbling with the phone in my hand. Wow, she says, staring out at the churling waves. This doesn't look good. I am really starting to hate her. As I try to dial 911, I realize I am being asked for a password. A different, better lady comes near me and says, maybe there's an override for emergencies, and takes the phone from my hand. Meanwhile, I see that the rafts are being thrown around in the white water that churns between the calm water near the sandbar and the open ocean. The thought occurs to me that a person cannot survive on their own out there. The good lady gives me back my phone with a thumbs-up gesture. 911, what's your emergency? A voice says. I'm on Big Beach in Mendocino, I hear my own voice say. And then I say what I can't bear to think. My kids are being washed out in the tide. It sounds horrible. Please send someone out here. My voice sounds tinny and desperate. I feel ineffectual and scared. Ma'am, stay on the line. I'm sending help, but I need you to answer some questions for me. What are the ages and sex of the juveniles? A 17-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl, I say. What is the location of the juveniles? I wish she'd stop calling them the juveniles like that. I want to scream at her, get someone out here now, and stop calling them the juveniles, but I can't. I have to remain calm, polite. She's my only lifeline. Big Beach, near the cliffs, on the north side of the beach, but as I tell her this, I realize that I can't see them anymore. Suddenly, I make out one of the rafts as it is tossed up into the air, completely upside down. I see, with a sharp flip in my stomach, that it is empty. Thank you. Thank you. I'm upsetting myself.
Her children are still alive, just in case you're worried about that. So, Keiran, what inspired you to start writing your memoirs about your children and your family?
Well, my son went to college and ditched me, so I was very bereft and grief-stricken, almost, you could say. And I also had a giant opening of time that I hadn't had for 18 years. He's a very thorough child. And so I decided to use that little window of time, about an hour in the mornings after I got up, to just write down with a pen things that I wanted him to know and things that I wanted my daughter to know, just things that had happened to us, because it occurred to me in that 1 hour that I had of peace in the morning that when you're raising a family, you're so busy running from one emergency to the next, or one water polo game to the next, or one practice to the next, or doctor's appointment, or weird rash to the next, that you don't have time to process it. And I thought it would be really great to be able to share their lives with them in a way that was in a calm, cool, reflective way, that I could really take some time and tell their stories. So that's what inspired me. Also, I'm sorry, I thought it was kind of a weird way to be able to spend time with my son, even though he was gone. It kind of made me feel like writing about his childhood made me feel close to him. So,
can you speak a little bit about your writing process? Like, how do you?
Yes, Susanna and I were talking about it earlier. I became a little bit, well, no, very ritualistic, because I can't just sit down and write. So I made myself, I got moleskins, Hemingway's little notebooks that he used to write in. I got gel pens because they're super fun to write with, a bunch of different colors.
and I removed myself physically from my computer or the dishes or anything, and I would go sit on my deck with my bulldog and just like think, you know, what do I want to tell them? What happened that I want them to know? And I would just write. And I would say to myself, you can misspell this, I don't care, just write. You know, you can fix this later, just write. And then every time I would stop, like, no, I can't, this is wrong, I'm being repetitive, I'd say, just write, just write, just write. After a while, going out on the deck wasn't far enough away from my email or the dishes, so I started hiking up to the top of Mount Baldy in San Anselmo with my moleskin and my gel pens, and I would just sit down and I would say, you know, just write for, I don't give myself a time limit. I tell myself, if you can write one sentence, I'll let you off the hook. And then I just find that if I let myself off the hook, I'll keep writing. So.
Have you finished most of the stories that you want to
You don't think I have. I was telling Jean on the way over here, if I read this story to you, don't say anything to me because I can't fix it now. But every time I look at any of my stories, I think, oh my God, no, and I have to fix it. So yes and no. To some degree, they're written, but they're certainly not good enough.
So they're still developing and you're still kind of filling in.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I don't want to keep working on them. But I love working on them, but it's hard for me to read them without a gel pen in my hand to go in and change it. And then I reprint it, and then I change it, and then I reprint it. So it's a little manic.
But you've also written another memoir, haven't you, recently?
I have. I've got a draft of a new book. Not that this is a book yet, but about working for the Obama campaign. I'm calling it the Obama Chronicles, which sounds like it's an inside view of the campaign. It's really not a political book. It's more about how many people I met and how many things I made myself do that I would never have done without wanting somebody like him in the White House. I traveled all over the country and trained volunteers, and I'm an introvert. I'm very shy, you can probably tell. And I made myself go talk to voters, and so it was an extraordinary experience that I would not have had if it weren't for President Obama.
Great. Yeah, I can't wait to read some of that one.
Yeah, it's not quite as personal as this one.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I just want to take a moment. We're sort of halfway through, and I just wanted to check in. Creative people are challenged during times of trouble. We started with Susanna talking about Europe at a different phase that we're sometimes reminded of lately. But we look to each other for inspiration and support. I want to recognize some people with us tonight who have been tireless advocates for writers in the local community. Carrie Hechtman, my co-conspirator for over 10 years at Peninsula Literary Series in Palo Alto, is here tonight supporting us. Carrie is also a poet and has done a lot of writing herself and teaches writing. We also have with us Patrick Daly and Charlotte Muse, producers of the delightful Not Yet Dead poetry series in Redwood City. And then two of our readers in the second half, Lita Kurth and Tania Martin, who curate the hilarious and eclectic Flash Fiction Forum in San Jose. Thank you for your support of so many writers. I also want to mention a stalwart advocate for writers, especially poets in the Palo Alto area and beyond, Bob Evans, who passed away recently. A kind, generous man who gave much in support of creative people, and a genial voice whose passing is a great loss for the community. So we think of him tonight. Our next reader is me. I'm Jean Znidarsic, and I'll read from my novel Shavasana. It's about two women who go to wine country for a vacation, but find that people can't always see them. This makes them angry. So they launch a series of capers, stealing a bottle of wine here, skipping out on a check there, until they end up hiding from the police at the mysterious Frangipani yoga studio. By the time they learn that the practice is based on a murderous quest for enlightenment, they are in too deep. This is a yoga class. Lila and Mary were stretched out on the floor. Neither had moved since Shavasana began half an hour before. They had decided not to stay at Frangipani. Neither had they left. Lila kept cleaning, Mary paid the bills and fed Teo, the studio dog. They staved off their husbands with vague reports and practiced the yoga twice a day. The morning class had been especially trying. Satya always began with simple folds and bends and progressed by careful increments into gruesome contortions, for which the students would be grateful in the fullness of time. But Satya hadn't been seen in weeks. In her place had appeared a series of her students, each with a distinct teaching style. First came Antimony, a contortionist who believed everyone should be able to put their feet behind their head. Palimony, who stared with disdain upon the class, no matter how they strived. Today's teacher, Acrimony, started with the wretched pigeon pose, upended them into the humbling chin stand, and followed that with colon lifts. When they were bruised and shaking and drenched in the briny steam of their own suffering, Acrimony decreed 20 minutes of partner yoga. Hated by everyone, partner yoga is rife with peril. But nobody is allowed to complain or to bow out. Like in a drawing class, nobody says anything, no matter how strange the model looks without her clothes. It isn't the Dharma thing. Antimony paired Lila with Florent, a Frenchman who was only in the class to look at the teachers. Mary with the reedy and decrepit Swami Samyami, real name Bob Johnson, who never bathed and hung around the park with a begging bowl, wearing nothing but Nike shorts. Acrimony described the next pose, which she called climbing lizard. In downward dog, Lila felt cold, mentholated fingers grasp her ankles. Florent began to lift. Struggling to keep her balance, she was unfolded upwards until she was in a handstand. He pulled her ankles until the front of his body was pressed against the length of her backside. Her eyes opened. Although upside down, she had a fine view of Samyama, whose ankles were being lifted by the trembling, reluctant Mary, who stood behind him holding her breath. His shorts hung loose around his middle, sliding up his long, amphibious thighs, and affording both Mary and Lila a view of his brown, wizened man parts, nestled like a ripe kiwi outside the slippery blue fabric of his shorts. Lila had a glimpse of Mary's pinched and wretched face between his knees before she lost control of her arms and collapsed on the mat, racked with the pain of her own swallowed laughter. Sacré Dieu, said Florent, whose groin had received a blow from her flailing legs. Espèce de con! At the same time, Mary's fingers, slick with sweat, lost their grip, and Samyama buckled in his turn, bringing Mary down with him. In the aftermath, the foursome received judgmental looks from the other students. There followed several even more intimate acrobatics, but Lila and Mary sulked on their mats. Florent huffed away for a smoke, and Samyama was rewarded, getting to do the rest of the poses with Antimony, whose personality had not yet begun to mar her loveliness. At last she coaxed them all into corpse pose and left them to bitterly savor that mercy while she sought fresh air and a kombucha latte in the streets of Calistoga. After everyone was gone, Lila and Mary remained on the floor, nostalgic for the endorphin high of Satya's aftermath, but marginally grateful to be alive. Mary spoke first, moving only her lips. I'd like to be buried in my pink dress. We can't run a yoga studio, said Lila. Who says we have to do the yoga? You do, Lila said, beginning to move her feet, ever since you found that infernal book. It's the way to enlightenment. How's that working for you? Lila sat up, levered herself into a standing position with lamentations, and looked down at her friend. Get up. I can't, cried Mary. My disc's fused after that trichinosis pose. Where's Satya? This one's a dominatrix. Why do you have to do everything Acrimony does? I can't let her win. She's like 12, Lila said on her way out of the room. After a stop to ruffle Teo's neck and scrub the kitchen sink, she returned with 2 mugs and the dog. Still on the floor with her eyes closed, Mary was pale and drawn, as if dead. Teo began licking her face while Lila stood over her drinking coffee. Too bad you can't get up, she said. Mary whimpered. What happens, said Lila, when this patchoula turns up and wants her studio back? She set Mary's mug on the floor. Before we go to jail, we make her explain where the hell she's been. Mary rolled on her side and sat up. How do you tell if you have internal bleeding? She held her ribs with one hand and took a sip of coffee. Anyhow, she's not coming back. How do you know? I read her mail, said Mary. That's not even legal. Lily began to roll up her mat. What did it say? Thank you. So, now I've lost my place here. 4, 5, 6. All right. It was always a treat to have our next guest. Oh, first I just want to say something about my inspiration. Okay. I was inspired to write Shavasana after I read Eat, Pray, Love, and I really wanted a different ending. I would be happy to scrub the floor of an ashram in India, but afterwards, I want the kind of enlightenment that's better than picking a guy up in a bar. We can all do that, but that just didn't interest me, so that's why I wrote it. Anyway, for our next reader, it was always a treat to have our next guest read for us at Peninsula Literary. We are grateful to have her join us at the first Tarweed reading. She will read 2 flash pieces, A Purse in My Head and Thrift Dating. Please welcome Lita Kurth.
Hello, everybody. I have a slight quandary here because I realize that one of my pieces has a number of bad words. I'm not sure how many of these I'm allowed to say on television. So I have an alternative, and I think I'll just skip the bad words one, alas. So I'll begin with thrift dates. Neither Lorraine nor her roommate Brenda were getting many nibbles on plenty of fish, and OkCupid was definitely not okay. They were both about to give up when Lorraine came in with the mail one day and stuck a flyer on top of Brenda's keyboard. Come to the Good Deal Megastore for thrift dating. Donate $2 to browse or get in free when you join our date lineup. Choose from a huge selection of women on Fridays or men on Saturdays. Free VHS tape with admission. No refunds. Do you think they'll have horror movies? Brenda asked. Focus, Lorraine replied. Let's go down on Friday and be in the lineup. That'll save us $2. Plus, the men who come on Friday definitely have $2. I hope they don't think we're gold diggers, Brenda said. Well, we are, said Lorraine, but I hope they don't realize it. They both laughed. Friday, they spent hours shaving, combing, curling, and cologning. Arriving at the Good Deal Megastore, they stepped carefully across the potholes of the parking lot toward the big glass doors. When they got inside, the room was lined with women, from those of the darkest ebony, on their right, to the extreme left, albinos. Crap, Lorraine said. I don't want to be sorted by color. I don't want to be sorted by size either, said Brenda. Forget this racist fat-shaming place. We don't need their stinking VHS tapes. Angry and disconsolate, they returned to their shared studio apartment. A week later, while sorting through the pizza and hamburger coupons, Lorraine stopped short. Hey, Brenda, the Salvation Navy has thrift dating now, too, and it only costs $1. Yay, Brenda said. That's our reward for boycotting Evil Good Deal. That very weekend, they dressed up again and headed for the Salvation Navy. There, people of all types milled about, a friendly group, and on nightstands and entertainment centers, free off-brand Oreos were laid out on unmatched china plates. Wow, this is nice, Lorraine said. Cloth napkins, too. Really nice, Brenda replied, but her attention was drawn to a thin man browsing the books. She went over and tapped him gently on the shoulder. Have you found a date yet, by any chance? Actually, I work here, he said with a smile. Oh, Brenda's heart plummeted. Sorry. He straightened up and cleared his throat. But hey, I'm up for a date. I get off in an hour. The name's Brian. Oh, right, it's on your name thing. Brenda flashed him a smile. They stood in front of the bookshelves talking about books they had read. I never read The Color Purple, but I heard it was great, Brenda said. It is great. Let me buy it for you with my employee discount. Brenda felt she was in heaven. A date with a cute guy who had a job, who was about to buy her the color purple with his employee discount. Just then, Lorraine came up with a handsome dude of her own. Perfect. Her handsome dude headed for the 12-step and spirituality shelf. This is the stuff I like, he said. I'm in the program here. I have a whole month sober. Oh my God, Lorraine said. You mean you work on your addictions? He nodded. For a whole month. Lorraine started crying right there in the store. Brenda hugged her and the two men smiled awkwardly. Brian brought Brenda her book. The four of them browsed and ate Oreos until the end of his shift, and they all walked out together. What are the chances we would all find what we're looking for here, Lorraine marveled. And what a deal, Brenda whispered. Within a year, the two couples were living in two well-kept mobile homes in a very nice mobile home park, which incidentally had a pool. They agreed to tell everyone they met on the internet. And the next one is also about relationships. It's called Bluebeard Sees a Therapist. And it's sort of a dialogue. Bluebeard. Why are women such untrustworthy liars? Why do they continually betray me? I give them everything money can buy. I even hand over the keys to the castle. And still, the one thing I ask them not to do, go into the locked room, they do. It makes me so mad I could just kill them and hang them up in a spare room. Therapist. It's great that you see a pattern in your marriages. You know, we all have the power to make small changes. I notice you tend to go off alone on long trips. Have you considered bringing your next wife along? She may have abandonment issues, which could encourage her to get back at you by opening doors you told her not to open. Bluebeard scratches his blue beard. I never thought of bringing any of my wives on trips before. Therapist, with a wry smile. You know the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results? Bluebeard. But my wives always seemed happy when I left. Therapist. It might be useful to get your ex-wives' perspectives. Can you talk to any of them? Bluebeard. No. Therapist. One liberating idea is that we all have more choices than we realize. Let's talk about your next marriage. What do you think would happen if you chose the eldest daughter instead of the youngest? What other options do you have? An attractive widow? Bluebeard. Yeah. It's just that I can't resist someone who really can't stand me. Therapist. Intimacy is a difficult area for many. Sometimes people don't realize they're pushing others away. For example, your beard is really unusual. How do women respond to it? Bluebeard. A few of them told me I look like an axe murderer. Therapist. How does that make you feel? Bluebeard. They said it in a really judgmental way. It makes me feel like I'm not accepted for who I am. Therapist. That must be painful. Tell me how your marriages start. Bluebeard. I usually go to their father's house and threaten him with death, but I also bribe him with horses and diamonds and lavish feasts. Therapist. I see. Kind of a traditional approach. Have you tried OkCupid or Plenty of Fish? I don't think Tinder is right for you. I sense you really want commitment. You want someone who will be there for you. Bluebeard. I guess I could try one of those. Therapist. Good for you. So what's one thing you might do differently in your next marriage? Bluebeard. Keep the keys away from the when I go away. Therapist. Good for you. You don't have to be a doormat. You don't have to supply the tools for anyone to take advantage of you anymore, do you? Bluebeard. Damn straight. So can I pay you in horses? I also have rooms full of ladies' dresses that were hardly worn.
So, do you want to talk a little bit about what makes you want to write about a subject, or how you Where did you get this Bluebeard thing, for example?
Well, that is a good question, but I usually like to put together things that would never go together. And so I thought, well, you know, I was thinking about Bluebeard. Maybe I was reading about fairy tales and thinking about, could I rewrite some fairy tale? And then I was thinking about online dating because one of my sisters is going through that trauma. And somehow I got the idea of Bluebeard, going to a therapist, and I ran with it.
Is most of what you write flash fiction, or do you do longer pieces also?
I'm working on several collections of flash fiction. The problem is my flash fictions are so different from each other that it's hard to get one collection together. But I'm trying to get some that are sort of in the realm of love and romance, and I'm working towards that. But I also have a couple novels, one that's finished and one that's about probably a third of the way done. And then a bunch of short stories and creative nonfiction.
So do you find time to write every day, or how do you keep yourself working?
No. One way I keep myself working is I teach a lot of creative writing, and so while my students are doing their little 15-minute exercises, so do I. I've gotten a lot of pieces out of that. Interestingly, I've got a fair number of published pieces that began with these little 15-minute exercises.
Do you do the prompt that you gave the students?
Yes.
Or? Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. You should publish a collection of the prompts.
Well, I've thought about
that you
that
use.
too. Yeah, I need a publisher for many things.
Yeah, well, hopefully you'll be finding one soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I got to know Tania Martin in a workshop where I had the pleasure of reading some of her work in progress. Half of the intrepid flash fiction forum duo, along with Lita, she will read from her novel, Worlds Away. Please welcome Tania Martin.
Hi. I'm going to start out by reading a synopsis. Worlds Away follows the trajectory of estranged twin sisters, Cora and Iris. As teens, the girls struggled against their mother's overbearing nature. Iris rebelled and Cora retreated into her books. After reaching adulthood, Iris fled to Southeast Asia, living on her wits and her poker skills, and leaving her sister in Los Angeles to pick up the pieces. Cora found refuge in the world of online gaming, where she built a community playing World of Warcraft. But when their mother slips into a deep depression, Cora decides she must track down her sister in Cambodia and bring her home to help their mother. Meanwhile, Iris is setting up an underground poker game with her Russian boyfriend, Sergei, who dreams of marrying Iris and getting a green card so they can live in America. But Iris isn't sure she shares Sergei's dream. She isn't even sure she wants to marry him. So this scene is Sergei is trying to romance Iris, but she is prickly and she pokes at his past. The leaves from the banyan tree cast dappled shadows on Iris's face. Such old trees, the roots reminded her of miniature ridges and canyons, and their lateral shoots reaching out and feeling their way into the nearby stone wall, prying into the cracks and gaps between the stones, were like fingers searching for treasures. Branches thick as anacondas held up an umbrella of foliage above her to a hazy blue sky. Colorful hot air balloons sailed by at a leisurely pace. They were lying on a blanket in the warm day, and the wine had made her sleepy. Sergei had surprised her with a picnic in the park. It was the anniversary of their first date, or so he said, and now her belly was full and she had her purse under her head for a pillow. "Tell me what you were like as a child," she said. She pictured a red-cheeked blonde boy with a dense little body and a bruise on his forehead and scraped up knees. "I was above average intelligence and looks," said Sergei. "Hey, we have company," he broke off. "Who's here?" said Iris, not wanting to get up and look, her forearm resting leisurely across her eyes. "Watch they don't steal your sandals," he said. He reached over and tickled her foot. She popped up on her elbows in time to see a monkey dart off with the wrapper from her sandwich. "Thief," said Sergey, throwing a stick at the monkey's direction. She watched the monkey lick the paper. "Talk about the pot calling the kettle black," said Iris. "What is this, pots and kettles?" said Sergey. "It's an idiom. It means don't be a hypocrite, like you calling the monkey a thief when you're no better." "What? I only do that when we're desperate. Anyway, I don't like being a thief. I told you, I want to leave that behind me." "I'm just teasing. You're too sensitive," she said. "I didn't have the opportunities same as you. I didn't throw away a university education." "You're no angel, Iris." "Huh. I bet you were a sneaky little thief when you were young. Tell me, what was the first thing you ever stole?" he said. "My sister's candy. She was so gullible, and she never found out. I told her that our parents came into our room at night and ate our Halloween candy while she was sleeping. But of course it was really me," she laughed. "Stealing is stealing. People think if it's just candy or a pencil, it's okay. At least I own what I do, and I've only ever stolen from strangers. You stole from your own twin sister." He reached over and pinched her. "Ouch! You never took anything from your brothers?" "No, they would have beaten me. I was the youngest, so I had to fight to keep what was mine. Do you know that I even had to fight for food? We were not allowed to serve ourselves more until we finished what was on our plates. My brothers were always done before me, and they'd eat everything left. They would eat their food with their eyes on my plate, like a race, and I was too slow, not as fast as my brothers, so I always got less," he said. "That's sad. I guess that explains why you eat so fast," she said. "Don't even touch my plate when I'm eating, or I'll bite you," he said. A smaller monkey appeared behind the banyan tree. Iris called out to it, coaxing the creature towards her with a slice of mango. "Iris, it has chili on it. Don't give it to the monkey," said Sergey. "He won't eat it if he doesn't like it," she said. She rolled up into a squat, the hem of her tunic making a hammock between her thighs. The little monkey, with a ridge of gray tufts on its head, snatched the mango from her hand and then ran off, lumbering away on its hind legs and one arm, while the other arm brought the mango to its mouth. Then it stood on two legs while it fought off another, punching out with a fist. Iris was reminded of the week they'd spent in Sihanoukville at the Fortuna Hotel near the Thai Gulf. It was a tacky little town with a beach resort and several casinos. They'd come into Cambodia because their Thai visas were expiring again. Sihanoukville had been a good run, but then the casinos had asked Iris to leave, accused her of counting cards. But there were so many monkeys in Sihanoukville. One day, while they were relaxing on the beach, a fat monkey stole away with Sergey's can of beer. Then it sat up in the branches of the tree above them, drinking it down, and it had belched when it finished, then thrown the empty back to them. Sergey had laughed until he had tears in his eyes. It was hilarious. They had their memories, she and Sergey, but they weren't the kind of memories you could tell to immigration officials. If they got married and they tried for a green card, they'd need better stories than that. What they really needed was some bleeding heart story of how they were working for a nonprofit that helped orphans. Maybe orphan monkeys. Sergey liked animals. Maybe they could fabricate some animal rescue NGO and take lots of pictures of the two of them with monkeys. She smiled at the idea. They could wrap fake bandages on the monkeys, make fake NGO t-shirts, and con some locals into backing up their story. At least Sergey never had been arrested, had no black marks on his record or red flag of a radical past. The problem was that he lacked a legitimate work history. Sergey was looking at his phone, and she had a pang of pity for him. The whole immigration thing was hopeless, unless maybe if they had a lot of money. She picked up her sandals and buckled them onto her feet. Sergey got the hint and tossed their picnic remains and blanket into the shopping bag. He held out his hands to help her up off the ground. They both looked back over their shoulders to the troop of monkeys, busy inspecting their picnic spot for scraps of food, and they strolled away hand in hand to the pedestrian path that joined up with the river walkway. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So what inspired you to write about your subject?
Curiosity. I'm curious about people that become involved in online communities, and so one of my characters is involved, and people that live precariously, like on their wits. So yeah, that kind of sparked my interest, and I wanted to write about those characters.
Yeah, do you have other characters like that in other pieces that you've written?
Yeah, I do actually. I have a lot of risk takers that I write about.
Are you a risk taker, or is this a vicarious?
Yeah, vicariously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk about a little bit about your process of how you write?
Yeah. So what I try to do is I get up, I make myself a cup of tea, and I sit down as early as I can in the morning, because I feel like if I can connect to my subconscious, I can find things that are, surprising.
Yeah.
And it's some days it's difficult. Like I might look at my email or get distracted, and so I have a friend that I write to once a week, and try and make a commitment of how much I'm going to write, and that helps.
So you have to be accountable to someone.
Yes.
What happens if you don't make it?
Well, sometimes I don't, and
you
then
get
I
scolded?
feel no, but I feel bad. I feel like I let myself down.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
yeah.
So thank you so much
Oh, you're welcome.
for coming
Thank
today
you.
and supporting writers. Our next guest is a pair of poets, also regulars at Peninsula Literary with their translations of Dutch poets. Please welcome Joel Katz and Robert Perry, reading from free-range Dutch poetry in translation. And it's rather than do the Q&A after, they're going to talk a little bit about what they've done, because it's very unique and wonderful. Please welcome our Dutch poets.
Thank you. Thank you.
Joel Katz and Robert Perry.
Yes. We're here to present our new book, Vrije Uitloop Free Range, which is a translation of 34 poems by a young Dutch poet, Saskia Stehauer. And the free range in Dutch means the same thing here. It means just a bigger cage. And so with this, we translated the poems with Saskia all the way through. So we met her in Holland last year and translated with her, and otherwise over email and Skype. And then the book came out on Earth Day. And as in the middle of the process, or towards the beginning, we encountered this sculpture. Can you do a close-up on this? And this very interesting, this is in the Kröller-Müller Museum in the middle of Holland in the Netherlands, and it's by the sculptor Herman de Vries. And what was interesting is that it looked like something that is from the California coast. But so there was this strange connection, and it spoke to our project, which was this collaboration and exchange with people in the United States and California and in Holland. And at the same time, Herman de Vries was also born in the same town as Saskia, and so there were all these bells that were ringing. And so I'll just read what this spoke to, the premise of the book, actually, and I'll read that to start us off. We knew right then, at that particular moment, in that particular place, we had found something, we had found someone and something that spoke to us and gave witness to the nature of our project. This piece of found art, the trunk of an olive tree, this artifact of nature presented as a work of art, placed on a pedestal, put in our path for us to discover and find meaning in it. Our book, like the sculpture, is nature serving as a work of art. Our book, like the sculpture, is offering witness. It is showing, not telling, how we human beings and nature are part of the same whole. We are connected within the same ecosystem, a process of exchange and transformation, just like our project and our experience of the sculpture. In our book, with the poems of Saskia Stehauer and in the sculpture of Herman de Vries, we discovered nature as witness, art as witness, artist as witness. And now the poems. And Joel will read the first two.
Thank you. 1,000 ways to be human. We poked out the eyes of the dove, hung him on a pole to deter his kind. We shot down buffalo until it was winter on the plains. We visited places until they faded and began to give up color. We forgot how a tree grows. Can I be born here if the sand blows in the wrong direction and the beetles are lost? Do I want to listen to a circle of people who don't know what they should do with the remains? A throat got slit. The scar is visible. Cleft. Before you open the pit, it's useful to know how to climb down a ladder. Contaminated edges. An animal has leaked there. 2 hands in a white field rake for roots. 2 dresses and a diary hang on the clothesline. Things won't get clean anymore. You open the lid, see no ladder. The smell sets you off running.
In the clouds, people on windowsills, people on ledges with purses, people with blankets wrapped around them, because they succeeded, because they didn't succeed, spoke in hushed tones, voiced their concerns about the baby, spread a safety net, the abandoned eyes, the neat clothes, everyone down again in one piece, some hugged, others taken away. Can attention get under their skin? Or does it feed the ravenous shame that only on high is not hungry? A matter of deeds. I don't trust the path I took with a hungry eye and soggy feet. The boat still grumbles in the distance, and nothing can be read from the vegetation. Yesterday's food was a piece of bad advice. My gut croaked like frogs in the night. I need a new compass, not that foul star that grins at me, or the smoky mirages, the boxes in our heads in which we slowly disappear. My father was the strongest man in the harbor, and my mother never cried. So I have to be able to draw up a travel plan. When I look back later, I do not want to see a skull with teeth hanging. I set the tone. I think the miracle out of the water.
Convergence. Around you, there were complaints about traffic. People were doing their errands in a hurry to get home in time for the children. An overconfident bird began a nest. Hardly anyone saw you lying there, and you saw almost no one anymore. Memories pulled at your hair, moved along with the wind that included you in its collection. If you stand still, you become a red light that others race through. Ahead of the prow, the boats stay still until the island has found them. In their dreams, the rowers design the land, feel how their toes touch the sand, see how the turtle turns itself around. In their head, the view of a city awakens. They see where a group of birds branches off, how the waves separate their foam. Heaps of clouds betray the island. They stand tall so the wind can blow through them, as there is nothing left that gets in their way.
And out of this process, there were so many things that we discovered and observations that we made, all three of us, and we had more to share. So we decided along the way that we would take note of these. So we added a section to the book called Field Notes. And so that's a collection of essays that we wrote and poems. And so we'd like to read a couple of things on that. So Joel, your poem.
For a new year. We needed a new kind of Bible, not so much a testament as a ball of twine to be unraveled, opened, something linear yet undirected, something beyond a ringtone and finger swipe to focus our attention, something as vaporous as a cloud yet casting a shadow on the very ground we walk on, while we consider how many haircuts it takes to feather a pillow, or how the storm drain at the corner of Putz and Montana in Cincinnati is the final resting place for misplaced car keys, how it's a portal for errant raccoons, how during autumn rains its grillwork resembles a coffee filter soggy and rank with leaves, how at that corner with no school crossing guard, the storm drain is an arbiter of flow. Is this where the twine will lead us? And will we find something to believe in?
And another thing that we did in the field notes is that we spoke to the design as well. So the pieces that we collected, so there's a detail from Herman de Vries's sculpture, The Witness, and then there's a painting here called Indigo, which is a painting, it's an art therapy painting done in the anthroposophical method, in which the color indigo is the color that represents our age, our era. And then this is the alyssum. I wrote a poem about the alyssum, and the alyssum that goes along with along the California coast. So I'll read my last poem. This is alyssum. Alyssum sway in the coastal wind, a piece in sunlight. Alyssum sway in coastal wind, at peace in sunlight, fragrant on the Big Sur Road, in a Carmel Valley garden, at my feet, guiding me all the way down to the sea cliffs, the trail down to the beach and blue horizon before sky and ocean disappear into mountains of mist. Ragged rock soften, cypress witness the weather, the history I carry home. Carry these rolling, crashing waves over the hills, across the San Joaquin, up the foothills to the Sawtooth Peaks, to Ebbets Pass, to glittering meadows, to the stark-faced stone jaw of the Sierras, likely to come up in conversation, campfire, coffee shop, car trip, can't help myself, the sweet words about the dark-eyed junco before breakfast, flow like rivers, all that I wish to share about Alyssum in the late afternoon when I finish reading Saskia's poems, grateful again for what Joel found at Perdue and brought to my attention, again for this book and my partners in translation and the rest. Oh, thank you. That's, keep reading? Sure, okay. So I'll read about indigo then. So as I mentioned, indigo is the color of our age. Indigo, crisis of good intentions. Indigo in the color of indigo is the color of aloneness, a state of separateness, the color of a material world in which we are imprisoned in our small selves, our own desires attached to matters ultimately of little importance or consequence. We are closed off from God, left to our own devices, in a state of fear and longing. Indigo is the color of our time. We are Lear on the heath, raging under a dark indigo sky, caught in a crisis of good intentions. Like Lear, we are trapped in a stormy dilemma, the waking nightmare of our own failings and those of others. We are flailing in the face of the dangerous results of the stubborn certainty of our good intentions. The depths of smoky blue offer an opening, a way out to freedom and redemption, to a oneness, a way to embrace the whole to which all belong and discover our connection to the divine and our connection to everything and everyone. In the smoky, swirling depths of indigo, there lives a hopeful something, call it light, the singular light that pushes through the indigo, making its presence known. That indigo is choice. We have a choice, even if we are enveloped in darkness, caught in this dilemma. We have the ability to choose, and despite all, to be positive and say yes to life. The opening is always there for us to walk through and find our niche in that ecosystem. And with that understanding, help us to learn how to live and relate to that world and to those who live there with us. The sign says, keep reading. Joel? You want to read Saskia's Spragueboard?
Yeah, let me find that.
Our dear poet Saskia, actually, very interestingly, is inspired by a Dutch tradition of proverbs, but she writes her own that applies to the century that she's living in. And so these proverbs show up in tile and in prints and so forth. And it's interesting how they've evolved and transformed into her poetry. What page? Oh yeah, it's 95.
Right.
So here's a selection for you.
Here's a selection. You need the autumn to get through the winter. He chooses the color of his message and knows that bread exists by the grace of butter. Fear is peace, not yet understood. So it has the ring of an old proverb, a Dutch tradition in ceramic tiles and such, but it's her own modern day construction or thinking about what's happening in the world, what's happening in our environment. So to make something that's old new, this is a vehicle for her to do that within her cultural tradition.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
We have a little extra time, so we're going to have another piece from Keiran Brandabur Langur from her memoir. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. This is the first story that I wrote when I was starting to work on this project. My kids aren't in it, but this story has a lot to do with the ideas of like what it is to be a woman and develop some self-esteem along the way. Because in order to be a mother, if you don't have self-esteem, you get squashed and flattened. So in hindsight, I think that's what this story is about. This story is called The Boots 1, Laura Luck. My friend Laura had these boots. I loved them. They were made of thick black leather with a low stacked heel and a side zipper. They also had buckles, but they weren't flashy. They were old and cracked. They were flattering, and they went with anything. She wore them with jeans. She wore them with shorts. She wore them with leggings, with dresses, with skirts. She could be wearing periwinkle capri pants or even straight up pajama pants, and don't think she didn't. And with those boots on, she would somehow look perfect. It seemed to me that they possessed a certain gravitas that conferred on their wearer a kind of authority, no matter what else she was wearing. Those boots just made everything better. I asked her once where she got them. One day, she told me, she was working at her high school job at the mall when a girl appeared, a sort of urchin-type person. She was wearing the boots. Keen-eyed Laura spotted them immediately. This poor waif had wandered into a sort of sartorial spiderweb. I say that because, well, Laura wanted those boots. And the thing about Laura was she got what she wanted. Whether it was a great parking spot, the right dorm mate, or the heart of the boy she liked, Laura got it. Add in effortless skinniness and perfect skin, whilst maintaining a diet comprised primarily of Lay's potato chips, ranch dip, and Pepsi, and frankly, she just seemed untouchable. We nicknamed this quality, rather inaccurately as it turned out, Laura Luck. Now, I grant you, once you got to know her, you realized that actual luck was probably tangential, floating helpfully but superfluously behind the twin engines of a will of iron and a sense of determination last seen in those Laura Ingalls Wilder people and the Donner Party. But because she made it seem so effortless, the name stuck. Whatever it was, wherever it actually came from, we called it Laura Luck, and it was as real as a cornfield. Can I help you? The spider asked the fly. The girl needed money. I'll give you $5 for the boots. Laura Luck, right there. The girl walked out of that mall, barefooted, with $5 stupid in her pocket, so she could what, buy a pack of cigarettes, eat a Happy Meal? And Laura? Laura got the boots. The thing is, you couldn't get emotional about it. You couldn't get jealous of it either. It just was what it was, and you learned to live on the right side of it. If someone crashed into her car, for example, she'd figure out a way to make it into a good thing. I can live with a dent, she'd yawn, pocketing the $3,000 in insurance money. Things just went her way, albeit with a good, hard push in the right direction. The first time I laid eyes on her, I was captivated. My only friends at this time were my restaurant and bar co-workers, a group comprised exclusively of gay men. They were like a family of big brothers to me, and I loved them. But I really had no female friends and 0 college friends. I was starting late, and the other students in all my classes had a semester's head start on me. So when I met Laura, I was a bit of a waif myself. She appealed to me because she seemed so strong. She projected such profound self-confidence it was palpable. And though I doubted it was catching or even learnable, I wanted at least proximity to it. So there I was in January, on the first day of the second semester of art school, my first day of college, in drawing class. We were all sitting in the freezing art studio in the Armory, in these seats with drawing desks attached to them that had been placed in concentric circles around the centerpiece, a table with a pile of cones, cylinders, and cubes and spheres on it that we were supposed to draw for the next 3 hours. The goal was to get to the studio early so as to lay claim to a good seat, one near, more or less, the centerpiece, giving the drawer a better view, hence a better drawing, and subsequently a better grade. By the time the bell rang, the room was almost full. A few minutes after that, a time filled with the shuffling of portfolios and arranging of various pencils by lead levels, the art teacher entered and began droning his instructions. As he spoke, 2 latecomers banged open the door. They were in mid-conversation and, oblivious to the professor's irritation, remained so. One of them, holding forth, while at the same time coolly assessing the seating situation in the classroom. The one doing the talking was tall and good-looking, with short blonde hair tucked behind her ears. She had wide-set blue eyes and high cheekbones, and the low affect mien of a bored aristocrat. The other one was also impressively tall, with short dark hair and an endearingly serious face. They were dressed identically in Levi's and white cotton sweatshirts. The only difference was that the follower girl was wearing worn, paint-splattered Keds, a nice touch for an art student, I noted appreciatively. The blonde one wore black leather ankle boots with a side zip and buckles. The one with the boots was apparently undeterred by the fact-based logistics of the situation. Obviously, all the seats close to the centerpiece had been taken, as had the not-so-close ones. But this didn't bother her in the least. Seemingly impervious to embarrassment or shame of any kind, she simply picked up a chair from the back of the room, attached easel and all, and carried it, forcing people to scooch their chairs out of her way and make room for her, and plunked it down right in front of the centerpiece, the best spot in the room. During this appalling breach of decency, she continued her monologue while the other girl, rapt, followed her story and copied her every move. She too picked up a chair easel. She too finagled her way to a good spot, the second best spot, as it were, next to the blonde girl. As they did this, the sordid tale went on, much to the apparent shock of the follower girl. "Oh my God!" she would gasp, scandalized at the more risque points in the story, much to the evident satisfaction of the orator. Shock was, quite naturally, the point. As best as I could make out, some girl, Mary Catherine O'Hara, say, had thrown a party over the winter break at her parents' house, and Mary Louise or someone or other got drunk and threw up, and now there was hell to pay. They had evidently all attended the same Catholic high school, and it was clearly the scandale du jour among them and their friends. And Cheekbones here had the inside scoop, or something. The story wasn't important. What was important was this girl's utter and complete lack of caring about whatsoever about what anyone thought. She was almost regal in her self-assuredness. Right there, in my mediocre seat that I had come early for, I made a vow to my friendless self to become friends with that girl. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have a special guest tonight, a local poet and not yet dead poet, curator of that reading in Redwood City, Patrick Daly.
Thank you, Jean. I'm going to read a poem from a fairly new anthology, America, We Call Your Name. This was the result of a call that the San Francisco publisher 16 Rivers Press put out after the 2016 election, and in a nutshell they asked for poems that enunciated a more hopeful vision of America and its politics than we had just experienced on November 9th, 2016. So I'm very honored to have a poem in this anthology. It's called Chosen, and it has an epigraph from Genesis. Noah was a just man, and Noah walked with God. And I chose to take that walking with God rather literally. Did Noah ask God as they walked together, what about the girls on the river path on his way to work, giggling in knots, loitering back from the first milking? The men fishing in the brightening gray, the women building up the fires, the mice and lizards starting at his tread, rustling to safety in vain. The boys following him, calling his name, the younger ones wheedling for something sweet, the bolder imitating his walk, the walk of a man being careful not to seem pleased with himself. Did he remember years and years ago how the girls looked at him then? And did he still have affection for the cover of certain trees in their last leaves now, with their prescient birds shaken in an ill wind? Or did he just squat without a word and scratch down 300 by 50 by 30 cubits, start sketching the window here so high, the door here, sucking his teeth at the length of the keel, the draft so many times deeper than the river would bear? How was he going to explain that? Could he already feel himself riding steadily upward on the waters, looking down at the people clinging to the oars? Could he already see them letting go, sinking toward the flowers? The cows crashing and roaring, the vigorous goats faltering, the crocodiles feasting for now. Did he wonder what he had gotten into when he began these walks with God? Did he look into his heart and draw breath to say no, all or none, on the earth, on the ark, this earth that holds us? Did he ask aloud, what is justice? I suppose he thought God is the Lord of hosts, and I am only Noah. Thinking it was going to be a lot to make an ark in a week, and his wife and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives and their children, and 1 pair of every unclean beast and 7 pairs of every clean beast, was going to be a lot to round up and bring on board. And I suppose he saw that not even God can keep himself from choosing, and went home and took his wife in his arms, and later lay in the dark awake and still awake until he got up and howled at the stars. But I wish he had felt the giants and the great men of his youth at his back and risen to the no. He could have argued his modest boat-building skills, the difficulties in finding and cutting gopher wood. He could have started on a bigger ark, impossibly huge, multiplying the cubits out to absurdity. He could have bargained for time, which God has always plenty of.
Thank you. Okay, we have one more special guest tonight. My longtime co-conspirator at Peninsula Literary, local poet and prose writer, Carrie Hechtman.
Thank you, Jean. I think we're going to be tight on time, so I'll try to make this fit into the time we have left. This is from a young adult novel called The Rain Miners. That last docking, the one that changed everything, was scheduled for dawn. Of course, I was there and properly prepared, meaning I wore my gloves and ropes and my emergency parapack that we're supposed to always wear, but some people don't bother. The wind seemed still, but I felt ruffled inside, unsettled and blustery, which can be one of the more dangerous kinds of weather to have, inside or outside. I walked through the crowd of viewers that always gathers for a docking. Being small makes me good at slipping between people, though I often wish I could just fly over them. Dad used to call me Crow sometimes because of my black hair, and it sort of rhymes with my name, Yoel. He says I have a piercing look sometimes and a crow's ability to fit in anywhere. I kept going toward the main platform and slipped through the bars of a gate to stand inside the crew area. I looked for Lieutenant Skegg at his post and went over. The skyship was lowering into view above the platform to the east in the proper descending position. I said a quiet hello to Lieutenant Skegg, who lets me stand near him and watch if I don't get in the way. "Morning, Yoel," he said. He glanced back at me with a distracted smile. "How are you feeling today?" "Why? Do you think there's some possible disturbance coming?" I asked. Skegg doesn't make small talk about feelings. He had some concern. "Updrafts are quite strong. That's all I can tell so far." He spoke into a radiocom. "Officer Carrick, I'm measuring updrafts at 60 miles per hour. Prepare for unanticipated shifting." "Noted," a voice responded. I wandered around to the other posts and out toward the end of the platform, being careful to stay out of the way and not too visible, since I really had no business being out there. I could see the transport ships in position and the skyship drawing closer. Everything was going fine. I still felt uneasy. Maybe it wasn't the weather. Maybe I was still upset about the encounter I had with Miss Yacht yesterday. I was going to Northeast Dawn Tower, and on the ladder passing her dwelling, I heard her threatening to send her kids to the grounders if they didn't behave. The littlest one, Briggs, started crying, but she didn't stop. "There's a ladder that goes all the way down," she yelled. Then she saw me sliding as quickly as I could down past her doorway. Our eyes met, and she knew I heard her. We don't talk about grounders. We just don't. If there really are people down there, we know nothing about them, and we don't want to know, especially if they have water, which no one believes could be true. Us sky dwellers have existed for 150 years, and we don't need any other kind of world. The skyship was coming closer, and the dock was at ready. Mounds of rope taller than me, coiled and waiting. Robotic arms as wide as our dwellings, raised. The dock crew at computers and levers, all eyes looking up. The holes of the ship the same blue as the sky. So they're hard to see from far away, but now I could see the ship's name on the bow, Soaring Phoenix. I saw the ship rise slightly and on a powerful updraft, then began to lower again. The two smaller transporter ships helped to stabilize the stern. I felt the usual wave of emotion flow over me as I stood like a fly under the looming, lowering skyship. In perfect synchronicity, the bow and stern settled into place and all the machinery began to lock it into the berth. I heard some yelling and scrambling as one of the robot arms below me missed its cleat and had to be repositioned to try again. But the ship was in place, and they would want to move quickly. "Ship is locked in. Caution regarding malfunction at cleat 14. Release the gangplank," said a voice over the loudspeaker. The gangplank began to move across to the building where the skyship crew would disembark if they chose. The crew generally stayed in the ship or went directly to the officers' building. They rarely walked around outside or went into the surrounding tower areas. The only chance to see them was when they crossed the gangplank to exchange officers. Usually only 2 or 3 would disembark. Sometimes there would be a crew addition or exchange. I had seen an upper-level transport at the docks a couple days before and tried to ask Lieutenant Skegg who was in it, but if he knew, he wouldn't say. I climbed up on a storage container near the gangplank to get a better view. The robot arm was still unattached nearby, and a few more dock workers had gathered to try to control its course as it swung toward the target cleat and missed again. The ship's hold opened, leading onto the gangplank, which formed a bridge to the officers' building. A woman wearing high-ranking emblems strode solemnly onto the walkway toward the building. The clatter surrounding the robot arm caused her to glance downward in irritation for a brief moment before she continued into the building. She was only inside for a minute or two before she came out again, followed by 3 young people, new recruits from the academy, the very position I had always dreamed of attaining. I felt a surge of anger, frustration, longing all at once. They were my age, wearing the same simple uniforms students here wear, looking proud as they followed their new captain onto the soaring Phoenix. I wanted to yell or weep. I could be there. I was just as smart and probably more ready. Then several things happened at once. A sudden, powerful gust of wind shook the entire docking platform, and everyone grabbed for the ropes on their hips. I looped mine around an attachment on the storage container and took advantage of the commotion to slip over the side and slide down to the platform. Suddenly, the robot arm arced sideways out of control and struck the gangplank with a deafening clang. The plank broke away from the officers' building and hit the platform deck at a steep angle. 2 of the recruits were thrown to the ground near my feet as I landed and grabbed my rope. Sparks flew as metal struck metal. The whole docking platform began to sway unevenly, and everyone who could was using their ropes to stabilize. I didn't see the captain or other recruits who must have made it into the ship's entrance. I crawled toward the 2 fallen recruits, a young woman lying unconscious just beyond reach of the rogue robot arm that still moved erratically, and past her, in the oncoming path of the wildly swinging gangplank, was a young man, conscious but dazed, who was sitting up, trying to get his bearings. The gangplank scraped toward him, and I ran over and grabbed him round the shoulders, then stumbled backward, pulling him away from the approaching metal. Sparks leapt around us as he seemed to regain some of his strength. "Fleet, is that you?" he called, trying to turn around to look at me. The wind blasted, another major gust. Everything was heaving and tilting. I was dimly aware of the crowd yelling as people tried to attach to something to keep from plunging over the edge. I looked for a way to pull the recruit farther away from the metal ramp, but suddenly a spark caught on a tarp right behind me and flames flared up. A voice over the loudspeaker that I realized had been speaking for several seconds began to call urgently. Emergency launch, clear the ship for launch. I looked at the recruit beside me. He was crouched low and looking fiercely up the steep gangplank at the still open doorway to the ship. "Come on," he yelled to me. "We've got to get on that ship." The crazed gangplank was sliding our way. I saw suddenly that it was either going to kill us or give me my one chance at a new life. He pulled me forward by the arm. "Grab for the railing," he called, running straight for the monster-like metal piece. I ran behind him and leapt for a brief moment. I felt I was soaring over the scene, watching the sparking ramp and our 2 figures bent toward a metal handrail before I felt myself take hold and pull and crawl along the shifting ramp that bucked and twisted. I lost my grip and felt my face slam into the ramp and tasted blood, but I held onto the ramp's edges, any gap I could hold or find, crawling up until I looked up and saw the recruit climb into the doorway and then turn around to grab my arm as I scrambled in. The loudspeaker said, "Robots release." I turned to see the ramp we had just climbed break away, fall straight down as the mechanical arms pulled away together, except for one lying broken on the platform. The coils let out their lines as we began to rise. We stayed tethered above the swaying platform for a few moments. I saw a circle of people, roped down, trying to tend to the fallen girl. "Lines release," I heard. And I thought that must be Skegg's voice. And we kept rising away from Dock 7. Then everything went black. Sorry, tight timing. It was hard to do with the tight timing.
Thank you to all our amazing readers and also the wonderful crew here at Mid-Peninsula Media for your tremendous skill and patience as we took on the challenge of learning this new way of producing a reading. What a crash course for us. Thank you to our stalwart Tarweed team for your many contributions. I love you. You'll find more information about tonight's writers on our website, tarweedpress.com, where you'll find other fresh voices in fiction. Thank you so much. you.